Well, Premier Scott Moe has jetted back from Houston and he spoke to delegates at SARM this week. Moe dropped some budget hints as the legislature gets set to resume on Wednesday, kicking off with a budget release. Murray Mandryk is shining up his New Balance speakers for Budget Day. He joins us now. Murray writes a political column for the Regina Leader-Post. Good morning, Murray.
It won't be New Balance.
No?
I would guarantee you nobody will be wearing New Balance on Budget Day.
So what kind of budget are you expecting, Murray?
A deficit budget. If you read what you're hearing so far, and what we've heard is Premier Moe at the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities Convention talk about some of the things that they're doing. Even before that, they announced, I think, a 6.3% increase in the revenue sharing pool to quote the record numbers that are record numbers every year. He's talking about making good on election promises. So that's more money for policing, 500 more officers. What they're promising 500 more treatment beds for drug addictions, which is obviously important, and given what we're seeing in Saskatoon and elsewhere in terms of the fentanyl crisis and other things. He's talking about more money for schools to learn basic reading, to improve basic reading skills, and obviously there's a teacher's contract to deal with, dealing with having to go out of province for surgeries. We've talked a ton about mammograms and everything else. All these things that they're talking about on Budget Day that are a good thing. Pretty much everything except paying for child care and whatever the provincial government contribution is to $10 a day federal daycare that he has to sign on to before March 31st, or perhaps earlier if we have a federal election. So it sounds like it's business as normal for governments, which means spending a lot and not really paying enough attention to balancing the budgets and the deficit. But as you know, the world is far from normal right now with the tariff issue and the revenue stream that the government can count on to pay for all this. So something's got to give. And guess what's going to be? Well, it's going to be a balanced budget. Or the notion of a balanced budget is going to be the thing that gives. So I think we're going to see a low-ball deficit that's come the 19th, come Wednesday. And I think as the year goes by, we'll see that deficit grow as we always do at mid-year, and further.
You mentioned there the uncertainty we have. What kind of impact does the trade war have on the projections that the government's making on March 19th, given we don't know how this is going to play out?
Well, not everything and not immediate for a couple of reasons. One of which is that Donald Trump has now pushed everything back to April 2nd because no one takes him seriously on April Fools or any other day. And we don't know what is going to be hit. We already know steel and aluminum is being hit. That's not a big issue specifically in Saskatchewan from a budgetary standpoint. Obviously a big issue to people working at Evraz and everywhere. And, your heart goes out to them for what they're going to deal with. But from a budgetary standpoint, all these things are down the road. Now, one of the issues down the road is, and something that probably we're not talking nearly enough about, is the 100% tariffs on canola that China is being imposed, which I assume, and I haven't done the calculations to be honest with you, Adam, but I assume that we sell far more canola to China than we sell steel to the U.S. So I think that's going to be a far bigger deal. However, putting this in proper perspective from a budget standpoint, and strictly from a budget standpoint, this is all money that comes in through taxes, through income tax, through other ways. So it's not quite as immediate as if it was revenue that the companies have to suffer for. But there are delayed effects and somewhat immediate effects. If people are laid off, they're not spending money. If farmers are being cautious, there's a whole other issue going on in terms of needing farm supports and other things. So there's a whole bunch of things that are going to impact. And coincidentally, the target date for the tariff is now the beginning of the fiscal 25-26 year. And heaven knows how serious there are, how many other things we're going to encounter from the U.S. and how much more instability. Obviously, oil prices aren't exactly soaring under the current circumstances. Obviously, potash is a huge deal in terms of the budget, and how much gets sold into the United States in the next fiscal year is kind of questionable, although in the case of potash, where else are you going to get it if you're a Nebraska or an Iowa or Minnesota farmer or Kansas farmer? You have to get it from the U.S. So I don't know how serious they are about how serious Trump is about imposing potash taxes. Same with oil, because he's lessened those tariff taxes than compared with other products. We just don't know. There's a huge amount of instability. And so for that reason, once again, I think they're going to lowball that deficit figure. But I think you can also safely bet that that deficit figure will grow as the fiscal year carries on, and we're dealing with this nonsense that we're going to have to be dealing for quite some time.
You mentioned there earlier about the mammogram issue, and the NDP has raised this again this week, saying that they have an email we reported on, and your paper reported on as well, discussing the cost concerns of women having to travel out of province for diagnostics and procedures they were getting in Saskatchewan up until very recently. What did you think of that and those concerns that were raised by the opposition?
Well, in terms of what we knew and what we believed, this is obviously nothing new, because obviously we knew going out of province to Calgary, staying in a hotel, having to travel, having to deal with this was incredibly costly to people. That's just logic. What is interesting about the emails that the NDP obtained, internal government emails, is the government knew this, and the government was fully aware that this was going to be a problem. And when governments are aware that something is going to be a problem at the time, you really have to raise the question why they didn't anticipate, why they didn't proactively do something about it before it became a problem. And I think that this is a demonstration of the government's lack of preparedness to deal with a pretty standard health issue. It's not something in this day and age that is new in terms of medical science. There is a push by the Canadian Cancer Association to have breast exams done much earlier than they used to now, setting a 40-year limit as to when they kick in, which is sort of a new thing. But we didn't have the capacity to do enough mammograms in this province before. And this is a huge problem in terms of sort of the government's delivery of healthcare services. Once again, something that can only be solved by throwing more money at it seems to be the case with, say, the fentanyl crisis, where policing or treatment beds are the solution in some ways, or in one way or the other. But all that's very costly. And once again, the problem with something when it's costly is that you can't afford to do everything that's costly without having to pay a price for it.
And speaking of paying a price, we're going to find out more about that cost of the budget, what their projections are, and we'll talk about that next week. Thanks so much, Murray.
You're very welcome.